Well, I've been hinting for some weeks. It's very difficult. When you're broadcasting during by-elections, you're in periods of purdah, and you really can't say too much. But it's been pretty obvious to me that George Galloway was going to win the Rochdale by-election. Why? Well, of the turnout, 43% of it was a postal vote. And we've got history on this, particularly with ethnic minorities. Even those that don't speak English, they get signed up for postal votes. Those votes get harvested, and that's what the Galloway campaign was able to do. So he has won. I think that it's very bad news, because I think it is, for the first time in England, certainly in modern times, we are seeing genuine sectarian politics. People voting along the lines, not of their opinions of the world, whether they're a bit to the left or a bit to the right, but people voting on religious lines. And overwhelmingly, that vote for Galloway was a Muslim vote. Indeed, his first words were, "This is for Gaza." So what is the Workers' Party of Great Britain? I'll give you some idea. They say things like, "We defend the achievements of the USSR, China, Cuba, etc." So, I mean, you could almost say they're a communist party. But what does amuse me is, since he was elected, he has picked up some domestic issues. He wants to try and save the football club. It's been around for 130 years. It's on the verge of going bust. And George Galloway wants to make Rochdale great again. I wonder where that came from. So today he was sworn in the House of Commons. Interestingly, he chose a Bible as opposed to a Quran, and he was shown into the House by Sir Peter Bottomley, the father of the House, and by Neil Hanvey, Alba Member of Parliament for Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath. But I wonder, is this a dark day for British democracy? And I've known George Galloway for a few years, and you can't help it when you're with him to think this man has got an extraordinary charisma. He is an amazing speaker. He is a very, very talented political figure. And I say that not as someone that supports his views. They're the abilities that George has, and yet I think he's using them in what is going to prove to be a very, very divisive way. He's now urging Jeremy Corbyn to join him, and you can see that Starmer now has a real problem on his left. I suspect that problem won't be that big for this year's general election, but it may well be for the one that comes after that. So let me ask you, is this a dark day for Parliament and for democracy? Give me your thoughts, please. Farage on gbnews.com. Now, I'm joined in the studio by Neil Hanvey. You saw him a moment ago on your screens. Now, originally, Neil, David Davis said that he was happy to accompany George Galloway into the House. And David Davis, very fair-minded man, left or right. But what put him off was this clip. Chris Williamson is the former Labour Member of Parliament for a Derby constituency. He's one of the deputy leaders of the Workers' Party. And at about 3 o'clock in the morning, he was on GB News, and this is what he said. And I think this is quite shocking.
Strong body of opinion that suggests that the Labour Party deliberately threw their man under the bus because they knew that they were on course to lose this election and lose it quite badly to George Galloway, and by throwing
Chris Williams, are you seriously suggesting
Ali under the bus, as it were,
that the Labour Party wanted its candidate to spout anti-Semitic words, that this was somehow an internal plot? I mean, that's just a territory of conspiracy theory and lunacy, surely.
Well, no, it's not, and secondly, it wasn't anti-Semitic what he said. I mean, the theory, which is not one I subscribe to, nor does George Galloway, but it's a theory that was carried in the New York Times, no less. It's been carried by Israeli media as well. No wonder he's quite happy to sit on his hands whilst Israel is implementing a genocide in Gaza, massacring people on a daily basis. They're actually killing more children every day than actually were being killed in Auschwitz.
Now, Neil, I think, number one, what he's saying, Chris Williamson, is that actually the Israelis welcomed this attack in. It was their means of getting back at the Gazans. And, I mean, any comparison with Auschwitz is surely beyond the pale. I know you're a reasonable-minded man. I know you believe in free, open debate with people regardless of opinions. And, hey, you've been on this show. We agree on things. We disagree on things.
Absolutely.
And you are very fair-minded and a Democrat in that sense. But there are some elements, surely, of this Workers' Party of Great Britain that you must find very difficult.
The responsibility that I carried out today was to bring in a new member. That is, I believe, a responsibility that should not be. I don't believe in deplatforming people. I don't believe in shutting down freedom of speech at all. And so what you can't associate is the wider political dimension with that responsibility to welcome new member to the House, because to refuse to do that, in my view, is discourtesy under parliamentary rules. I think it's churlish to behave in that way, and it's also, most importantly, an insult and an affront to the electorate that returned that member. Now, whether I agree with members from across the House, and there are some members in the Conservative benches that I agree with on certain issues, and there are members in the SNP with which I disagree vociferously around. However, the basic respect for open debate and freedom of speech is a fundamental right, and I don't believe that anyone in the House should refuse the people who elected Mr. Galloway the right to take up his seat.
I get that.
That's a simple principle.
No, I get that, and you've explained that very clearly. Yeah. Just to one or two of the issues. We've seen sectarian politics in Northern Ireland for decades and how horrendous it can be. And I think in sort of Glasgow, we get specimens of sectarianism, Rangers playing Celtic, etc., where people divide on religious lines. My point about this, I mean, look, I think this sort of from the river to the sea, let's obliterate Israel stuff is pretty vile. That's my view, strongly my view. And I think not condemning the 7th of October attacks, I find that, I mean, don't you find that difficult?
Well, I mean, my party took a very clear position and released a statement from our party leader, Alex Salmond, on the 9th of October that condemned the attacks, that said violence, death and destruction are no solution to any problem, wherever it may be, but that also applies to the people of Gaza, and the loss of life of women and children in the current conflict is completely unacceptable, and that's why we support...
No, absolutely, but you did condemn the attacks of October the 7th, and that draws a very big distinction between where the Workers' Party are on this. My concern, Neil, is this, that we have a Muslim population across the United Kingdom that has expanded by 44% over the course of the last 10 years. It is now a significant number of people. And whilst not all of them are going to vote for George Galloway and his party, clearly, since this conflict, and perhaps brewing before, a significant number are. What I am bemoaning is that what we saw today was a rebirth. It's happened before in history, but a rebirth of religious sectarianism, and that I find disturbing. I
take a different view to the one that you've just set out there, and I've heard that view advanced by yourself previously. My background, I was born in Northern Ireland. I was born in Belfast. I spent my early years in Ireland. I know the damage that sectarianism does firsthand. I remember what that was like living there, and thankfully my parents took the decision to move to Scotland, and that's why Scotland is now my home. But I think the energy behind the Galloway victory is less about religious sectarianism and much more to do with a wider frustration in the population. There are demonstrations happening up and down the country with people from all faiths and no faiths opposing the humanitarian crisis that's happening in Gaza. And so I think it's unhelpful. I think it's potentially dangerous to frame this as a sectarian.
Do you really?
Yes, I do.
Well, I mean, I get. I fully understand.
And I say that as someone who has lived through that narrative, and I understand how deeply damaging that is to communities.
I take your point on this level, that when you see the marches in London, there are plenty of middle-class white girls called Jocasta on the marches, and there's the old hard left and the Corbynites, and I get that. But if you look at the election literature, that George Galloway was putting out, he was appealing to a religious vote.
Yeah. And that's one of the wonderful things about democracy. Now that George Galloway is in the chamber, when there are points on which we agree, we will hopefully collaborate. And when there are things that I disagree with him about, I will be forthright in my criticism. And that is the wonderful thing about freedom of speech and proper democracy, and that is fundamentally why
Neil Hanvey,
he had to take a seat.
You and I take some strongly opposing views on this particular issue. I am convinced that sectarianism has arrived and it's here to stay. And I'm just going to sort of point out the false priorities of the House. This was an exchange that took place today, and it took place between Liz Twist, Labour MP for Blaydon, and she put a question to Tory Minister and MP for Kensington, Felicity Buckham. Let's have a look.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. But for almost 2 years, this Tory government has failed to appoint an independent adviser on Islamophobia. The former adviser has since criticised the government for their failure to engage, revealing that he couldn't even get them to provide terms of reference for his role. Does the Minister agree with me that this government lacks the political will to tackle this pernicious hatred, or even to call it out?
I strongly disagree with the Honourable Lady, and I'd just like to let you know that we do plan to appoint a new independent adviser on anti-Muslim hatred, and we will be updating the House shortly.
So there we are, within a fortnight of From the River to the Sea being posted up on the Elizabeth Tower that houses Big Ben with not a single arrest, with the mob outside Parliament, MPs absolutely scared, and George Galloway taking his seat. We're more worried about Islamophobia and potentially causing offence by what we say, actually, than we are about the division, the threat, and, as we've learnt over the weekend, the upped risk of terrorism. I think Parliament is in denial. Neil Hanvey would disagree with me, but there we are.